Born in Charlottesville, Deborah grew up in Virginia, Puerto Rico, and New England. She is a well-known writer and biographer, and her latest book, Charlottesville, shows how a city more associated with Thomas Jefferson than civil unrest became a flashpoint in a continuing struggle over a nation's founding myths. We're delighted to have her again with us on this session. Dan Morrison is a well-known journalist writing on science, culture, and conflict. His works have appeared in various publications, and he's also worked in South Asia, where his topics range from militancy in Pakistan and Afghanistan to the dying art of the hand-painted Bollywood movie poster. A huge round of applause for all our panelists, and also for our moderator, Ankita Mukherji, an independent media consultant who produced India's first literary TV show, Just Books, and has also worked in publishing. Over to you now, Ankita.
Thank you so much, Shahana. And it's wonderful to be back in Kolkata as always. It's always home. And it's actually, I think, fairly appropriate to be talking about New York sitting in Kolkata because I feel the cities have a few things in common. They both kind of punch above their weight in terms of cultural influence. You know, it's about art, it's about being argumentative, it's about a love for food, about protests. Well, you know, I mean, there are many, many similarities. But, you know, it's wonderful to have not one, but 3 New Yorkers with me to be talking about the city, not just New Yorkers, but global citizens. Deborah, if I may come to you first, as someone who's sort of spent so much time in both these cities, do you see some of these parallels, and in what way do you feel New York and Kolkata both sort of add to your cultural and literary life?
Well, they're both very crowded. They're both filled with writers, poets, lots and lots of feeling for literature. You know, whether or not people are being published, I feel like, you know, it just, both cities have a real lyric quality to them. And, you know, I went to New York soon after graduating from college. I just published my first book. I went to work for a book publisher and, you know, just sort of absorbed literary culture by going to readings, and you know, it was a very fertile time on the Lower East Side. There was the New Yorican Poetry Cafe. I was a real aficionado of poetry, and you know, in the end, I was laid off from my job, and I wrote a book proposal, and that was sort of the beginning of my literary career. And I don't think I would have gotten the courage if I hadn't seen how many bad books are published.
I think that's true of practically any city, not just New York or Kolkata.
I thought I could do better than that. So yeah, that was my entree into New York.
Right. Prabal, you talk so movingly about your entry to New York now, almost a quarter of a century or a little over a quarter of a century ago. In some ways, your book, Walk Like a Girl, almost seems like a love poem to the city. What about New York really let you be yourself? You do talk about that a lot. But, you know, my question is, you know, just going forward a little bit from there, do you think if you were to go to New York for the first time now, would it still offer you the same freedoms, the same space to be yourself?
Absolutely, I think so. You know, I mean, things have changed, obviously. I think a lot of us are aware of it, you know, how the world has changed, how America has changed. But, you know, when I went to New York, I went to New York because I knew it was a city of misfits. You know, there were people who didn't find themselves in their hometown, or they were searching for their souls or soulmates, and not necessarily a partner, a love partner, but community where they could exist with unapologetically themselves. So New York, to me, I'll never forget when I landed there, you know, getting in the, like, as Debbie said, it's crowded, noisy, and a taxi cab, all the honking and everything. But I rolled down the window and I still remember it. I felt home, simply because I looked around that city and I saw different kinds of people, different walks of life, different skin color, different race, different sizes, and I really loved it. I lived in the East Village, and my first, when I got there, and I went to this little restaurant called Cafe Gitan, and which was in Nolita, and I got there. I kind of like wandered around Soho, and I sat down and I ordered. They had like a chicken with couscous, and I was like something that was close to home, and I wanted something spicy and all of that. I sat down, and there was a magazine. It was Vogue, and I was like reading it, and somebody sat down next to me, and I looked at it was David Bowie, you know.
Wow.
And so to me, I'll never forget it. To me, second day or the third day in New York, when I sat there, and he was my icon, and not just in style, but who he was. He was really playing with the culture in terms of gender, in terms of like how a man can appear, and what can be an artist can be, and like all that stuff. So to me, I was home. Now, of course, you know, the city is really expensive, so the artists have moved to not necessarily in the East Village, or they've moved away. But the heart of it, I live near Washington Square Park, especially during Black Lives Matter and all the protests, the heart of it happens there. And it's next to NYU, and I see the students and the protests and everything that's happening.
Right.
And I love it, the hub, you know, the soul of the country. I still feel, you know, I'm biased, you know. I feel like lazy in New York City, so I love it. You know, it's my home. So yeah.
Wonderful. Dan, if you want to just pick on, start off from one of the points made by Prabal just now, that, you know, there is definitely a difference between the New York of, say, 25 years ago and now in terms of just affordability, in terms of how hard and how harsh actual lived realities in New York are. And do you think then that makes for a very different city from what it used to be, perhaps, or what it represents now to people?
So old-timers have been complaining that, you know, it's not like it was, and you couldn't possibly do what we did since the days of antiquity. But yeah, it was cheaper and easier then. You know, I had nothing. You know, I was hauling sheetrock and living in a sub-basement apartment that today would, you know, probably rent for $5,000. You know, what I was paying for $400 for a place that I built myself for $350. So, you know, there's a segment of people who are creative who come from financially well-off backgrounds, and the city still serves them, right? Because they've got a little family wind in their sails. What you see in New York now is that the people coming from the bottom have less opportunity and will go elsewhere, or their potential will not be tested or come to fruition because they're going to be too busy making a living. And that's the state of the city right now among the people in their 20s that I know.
Right. And, you know, I think that obviously kind of brings us to this specific moment in time. You know, there's certainly no better time to talk about New York than now, when it's undergoing this sort of unique moment of political churn, of reinvention, with, you know, obviously the moment that the world has been looking at, which is the election of Zohran Mamdani as New York mayor. But what do you think he tapped into in terms of the problems and the crises that are facing normal New Yorkers at the moment? Why did his message seem so universal, particularly to immigrants who've made New York their home, but indeed people across social strata, perhaps particularly those at the bottom of it? Anyone who would like to kind of take that.
I mean, I was at the inauguration, and,
Yeah.
I helmed a lot of our news coverage of his election. He had the laser focus on affordability, and it rang. You know, it was a tuning fork. You know, it rang like a tuning fork for a large swath of the city. It is too expensive. The rents are out of control, and the way like the old liberal way of addressing these problems, that it was incremental and oh, we'll tinker with this rule, we'll change this law to a certain degree, we'll find a new funding mechanism for this small thing. That it's too late. His message was one of emergency. We're in an emergency and we need dramatic solutions, and it's one that resonates across the country as well, to a large degree, with young voters, with young people especially. It's very potent. Now he is mayor. He's not like a cute candidate for mayor. He is the mayor,
Yeah.
and now he's got to deliver, and this will be interesting and fun to see.
Right. But what do you think, Prabal, New York is saying right now? This election has been described as everything from historic to inevitable. Is New York making a statement? Is this New York reinventing itself? Is this New York wildly diverging from what we see happening in the rest of America?
I think what New York is doing is what not just New York and not just the country, but globally what we are feeling. The status quo isn't serving a lot of people, right? And we are what we're seeking is change. And I think that's what Zoran Mandani, represents as a change. Like what has been handed to us, as I said, the status quo has been serving certain kind of people, similar results, and there's a disenchantment. And what New York is doing, I always look at, what New York is doing and what the country is doing is what's happening globally also, We are at a place right now, I think people are realizing, whether it's through education or through social media, whatever, they're finding their own voices, and they're saying, like, we want change. It's any kind of change is better than what is happening in their particular life right now. And as he mentioned, rightfully, yes, the city serves the majority, who have access to it. That is just the reality of it. That is just the reality of, especially in communities of creatives, who are real creatives. We always thrive on our creativity and not necessarily are driven by the finances of it all, right? So we don't know how to survive in a city that demands a lot of finances. But that's why the hubs like this, community like this, meeting like this, it gives us hope. For me, I go outside of the city. There's a whole Nepali community in Queens, which is not necessarily glamorous for the fashion world, but for me it is the soul and a heartbeat of there. And then I'm in, let's say if I'm in an Uber and I talk to drivers from different parts of the world. So my thing is, I always keep on reminding, oftentimes we are told about New York City and the celebration has to be the biggest win or it has to be in the spotlight. But my constant quest is celebrating those small wins. Yeah. These drivers that come from Nepal, right, or India, and I talk to them, they work nonstop, but they're able to send their families money. And little things, and they say, they say, Dai, Dai is a big brother, and Dai, and we can do whatever we want to. We have our own hours. It's hard, but I've built a house there. So I am just focusing on that, because it's very easy to. I'm not trying to glaze over all the issues, but it's very easy to sometimes become cynical, and that's what the status quo wants us to do, is be a cynic. And not to give into that and be hopeful. And that is the biggest, I said, the hope is the most radical resistance that we can have right now. And that's our creatives' jobs, that's what I think.
Wonderful. That's an idea we can all, I think, carry away with us in these rather depressing and dark times. But Deborah, do you agree that, hope is what New York affords rather than the aggravation of daily living, or how do you see it as aggravation or muse?
Well, when Zoran started running, I was coming off writing this book about, basically the rise of white supremacy in America, and his was just such a different story, and I was so happy to be part of it, and along with 10,000 other people, canvassing, raising money. But what I'm really grateful to Zoran for is opening up parts of the city that I've lived in the city for, I don't know, 40 years now. And, there are neighborhoods that I canvassed in that I'd never gone to, you know, and so many.
The fact
you know,
that he chose to eat samosas in
Yeah,
a tiny little.
And I could have signed up for my
Bangladeshi
own
restaurant.
neighborhood or neighborhoods that I knew well, but I always signed up for ones that I had never been to. And, you know, you meet Greek communities, you meet, you go to, you know, coffee shops run by, you know, Middle Eastern coffee shops, or you go to, you know, it was just like this whole world was opening up to me. And I was really grateful to him for that, because so much of New York has always, like, it's always been about Manhattan and, you know, and the boroughs, or what they call the bridge and tunnel people, you know, have always sort of been second fiddle. But he really put them front and center, and I really appreciate it. You know, the Yemeni coffee houses and the biryanis and
the very, very sort of direct door-to-door campaign as well, and
Yeah.
sort of speaking in the language that a younger audience could tap into as well. You know, Dan, purely from you know, your work at the intersection of media and politics and sort of institutions, how do you see Zoran's messaging as a broader function of how identity works, or how identity is performed in New York?
That's a big one. So you can start with the fluency in social media. You can start with the, as has been noted, the focus on real working people as opposed to fake working people who often appear in political advertisements. You know, actual people who he knows, who he, you know, the taxi driver he went on a hunger strike with, whether or not you know the details of the emergency that happened with taxi drivers going bankrupt. The fact that he went on a hunger strike with this guy, it sticks, it'll lodge in the brain. You know, that's all very effective, but effective because it was authentic, right? Because this guy is real in that way, and you can't fake it. I've talked to consultants who say, you know, who worked with him and now are getting calls. Can you give us some Mamdani action? You know, and their reply is, you know, well, we can't really unless you can really
Clone
be that.
him.
Unless you can be real, then you can't get some of the Mamdani action. You know,
Right.
he's lightning in a bottle in the same way that, you know, that Donald Trump is lightning in a bottle. He's
I think it's wonderful that you bring up Donald Trump,
talent.
because
It's just a fact.
yeah, you know, I think it's great that you bring up Donald Trump, because, you know, here is someone else who's also quintessentially a New Yorker.
Queens
you know.
person. They're both Queens.
They're both Queens people. Wonderful. So, you know, I think that just illustrates how New York can kind of hold within itself multitudes. And, you know, what does that say about New York as a city to you? The fact that you can have sort of wealth and ambition and real estate greed and, you know, be an altar to capitalism, and yet also have enough space for dissent, for protest, for, you know, completely, you know, in some ways subaltern identities.
Well, greed makes a city, right? Cities are built on
It was
on
also
greed.
the 1980s version of greed. You know, greed is good version of greed. That Trump is very much a creature of New York. New York is totally responsible for his rise. You know, I think we have a lot to answer for when it comes to him. But yeah, Zoran's a completely different moment.
He's a different moment, and yes, he represents Queens now, but he's really a product of the Upper West Side.
Yes.
I mean, he is the child of cultural elites, you know, who has unique gifts, and that's why it works. Like, if it's a working class or middle class message, but he and the people surrounding him are relatively privileged folks.
Well, but he went to Bronx Science, and, you know, his friends at Bronx Science, they were like first-generation migrants, really bright, you know, whose parents didn't speak English, you know. So he was like exposed to kids coming from all over the city, and that became his cohort. And
But Bronx Science is one of the elite New York City public high schools.
so it doesn't cost any money to go. You have to be kind of bright to get into it. Not scary bright, but pretty bright. Yeah.
Right. When, before we get sort of into too much New York minutiae, maybe I should bring Prabal back in. Prabal, you've always used sort of fashion to talk about identity, about visibility, and, nothing is perhaps more New York than the Met Gala. So let's talk a little about your moment at the Met Gala.
Sure, from Donald Trump to Met Gala.
To Met Gala and to Diljit Dosanjh, who, I would read about any day rather than Donald Trump. Tell us a little about that moment, because I think it's been interpreted and reinterpreted by so many, what you chose to do in that moment.
With Diljit.
With Diljit, yes.
Well, just to touch on what you guys were talking about, New York is a city of highs and lows, like what you, access, privilege, and also struggle, which is pretty much how life is in a nutshell. So I always look at, when I started, I'm an immigrant, and I went there, I didn't know anyone, and the way I built my business, and now I have access to it, I've always been aware of my, the seat at the table that I had, right? So when I got the opportunity, and Anna Wintour has been my biggest mentor and has been a supportive of my entire career and my decisions in my fashion business. So when I had the privilege of having a table, and I started with, the Deepika, Alia Bhatt, and when it came to Diljit Dosanjh, it was mainly, I wanted someone, to be completely honest, the idea was, given to be my brother, who lives in Mumbai. My siblings and I, we talk a lot about it, and he was the one who said, how about Diljit Dosanjh? He's like, and then at the time he had performed at Coachella and everything, and what I wanted to do was anytime, and it's not always, anytime I have access to a seat at the table, I have my own seat, I want to create a seat for someone else also. And when I talk to Diljit, and everyone has an option to wear whatever they want. I always have a conversation, I always ask, what do you want to represent, what do you want to feel like? When we had that conversation, and when he was unapologetically wanting to be who he was and where he came from and represent the country and represent himself, it really spoke to me, because that's how I've existed in fashion and also in New York and in America, unapologetically, deeply rooted to my heritage, right? So when that look came out, we had a lot of conversation, and so we made the dress and the whole look and everything, and Diljit came to my studio, and we hadn't met in person, we hadn't. So we did the first fitting, and and he was waiting there, and I came in from my studio, and he was there, and he said, hi, hello, and he was very humble and polite. So I said, Sat Sri Akal ji, that's what I said. He just looked at, and I said, "Mainu Punjabi gal karni aandi hai, thodi." That's what I said, right?
How many languages do you speak?
I speak Hindi pretty fluently, English, Nepali, and Punjabi a little bit, because I lived in Delhi for a while. Then he was like, oh my God, that is amazing. So, and the thing is, so the Met Gala happened, and then the day of, I'll never forget this, so there's you wait in line, and the step starts to happen there. He turned around, and a lot of people didn't know who he was. There was a collective gasp when he showed up in his outfit, fully. And then the camera clicks happened. And I'll never forget that moment. It was like, I've never heard so many cameras going on like that. And he happened to be the second most, searched person at the Met Gala that year. Now, what it tells me, and inside the Met Gala, everyone was coming to him. A lot of people knew, other musicians, other creative people knew who he was. Shakira came up to him and said, I love your music. And my job as a creative person, as a designer who had access, I sat back and let him shine, because that was his moment. Yeah. I didn't want, it was not about me. Nothing creatively is ever about a one person. Mm-hmm. I get to come out at the runway, and in the end, and I take a bow, but there's a village behind me, Even at the Met Gala also, it was always that. So I always feel like, that moment to me was when I felt like it was my way of giving back to this country. That gave me identity. I was born in Singapore. I grew up in Nepal. I lived in India, in Delhi and Mumbai, and
it's all right. We say Calcutta as well. We're proudly Calcutta.
In this world. Anyway, so and I grew up with this incredible Hindi films, art films, and commercial films, and all of that stuff. It gave me this, I would say, the permission to dream. Hence, I could do it. So that moment was my way of, giving back to this country. Honestly, that moment with Diljit, like, in my own personal way, I didn't know it was going to land like that, and it did. But it was not about me; it was about him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that wonderful story with us. Deborah, if you would sort of want to reflect further on the city being a muse, Prabal's talked about it, how it's been a muse for him, how, India's been a muse while sitting in New York. But, since you've spent so much time there, you talk about cities as kind of emotional landscapes. Would you write a book about New York?
Well, I've written several books about New Yorkers. Allen Ginsberg, Laura Riding, Mariam Jamila.
Yeah.
And I always remember my first job was on Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street working for a book publisher, and right across the street was the New York Public Library. And I would spend all my lunch hours just going, either eating lunch on the steps or going in and reading books. And, that became a big resource for me. That's sort of at the heart of the city. And, you just go and they have amazing archives. They have like Virginia Woolf's cane that she left on the bank when she went into the river. They have, unexpected archives like that of Mariam Jamila. They even have Jack Kerouac's manuscript for On the Road. So that was like, where I sort of figured out how to be first a biographer and then, a writer of creative nonfiction. And then I got a fellowship where I got an office in the library, and I could go whatever time of day or night I wanted to. I could go work there at midnight. And that was really peak experience for me. It's very different from the Met Gala, but...
No. I do want to, listen, I get asked this question. Everyone thinks my life is that 24/7. It's not, Fashion and the glamour is, I would say, if I'm lucky, 5% of what I do. Unfortunately, that's the only thing that...
What is the other 95, I'm sure?
Arduous hard work, like my office in Garment District, believe it or not, I'm flying back tomorrow. In 2 weeks, I have a fashion show.
Wow.
My team is I've been up all night, talking to my team, It's nonstop. New York is not a city for someone who's complacent,
Right.
Yeah. New York City demands a lot out of you, I always say my favorite time in New York City is right before 6 a.m. I usually wake up super early in the morning. I call it the witching hour. There are people either going to their work or coming back after a late night. I would say, walk of shame to the walk to work. All of it, and that's what New York does. So yeah.
So, well, the New York Minute phrase comes about for a reason, presumably, for precisely that reason. But then let's, to go back a little bit to the whole Mamdani question, and just complicate this a little more. Do you think Zohran Mamdani's election, in a way, kind of exposed the New York media's ideological fault lines? Because, here's a city that prides itself on its progressivism, on its sort of liberalism, but, suddenly you saw newsrooms which had this certain anxiety about being seen as too sympathetic to the left. There was a certain amount of discomfort with his sort of very unapologetic positions on Israel and Palestine, for instance. So, where does New York situate itself? And where does the New York media situate itself in that situation?
It's a very broad media. It contains some very hard right organs, and it has middle of the road legacy newspapers that are trying to hold that center, and they're not sure what holding the center means in the current environment. And then you have very progressive online outlets whose thumbs are firmly on the scale for him. It's a pretty broad sweep there. You have this surprising moment last summer when this young man who most hadn't heard of, who was polling at 0.001%, suddenly just took off, right? Like a jet, right? And there's a lot of catching up to do. There's a lot of you can go through your Rolodex and there's no one who can give you context, right, on who this person is. And it's been very good for the media. It's been very good for the city, and it's been very good for the media, whether or not he succeeds or not. Just to see this kind of democracy in action closer to the way it's meant to be, with enthusiasm and people-to-people contacts. It's been a great ride, I think, for the media. Whether it's people who rabidly oppose him, again, those trying to hold the fact-based center,
Right.
or the progressives who
Deborah, would you agree with that assessment? And do you see the election of Mamdani as New York's way of kind of doubling down on its progressive identity? Or is it just kind of reacting to everyday economic anxiety and, the housing stress, inequality?
Well, I think the mainstream media really showed, just the way we were totally caught off guard by Trump's winning of the presidency. They were not prepared for Zoran, and the Times, New York Times in particular, I think covered itself in mud. They didn't get him. They didn't understand his appeal, and they are still stumbling around in the dark, trying to get a beat on him, which I think doesn't really speak well to the mainstream
Dan?
media's grasp.
The sins of the New York Times belong to the New York Times. I can't,
Right. No, I know you don't work for the New York Times, but yeah, I was like.
But you do occasionally contribute.
Once upon a time, yes. From here, from this very city.
Well, we'd still like to hear what you think.
No, it's a political figure. You're not supposed to be on anyone's side, right? You're supposed to be giving
Oh, come on, between Cuomo and Zoran, you can't be on anyone's side.
That's correct. That's the job.
I'm so glad I'm not a journalist.
Yeah, no, it's cool that you're not. But Mamdani's opponent was a former governor with a reputation for vindictiveness, but who really knew the gears of power and the gears of government and how to use them. And he was coming across, against this young man who had no experience with anything, but knew what ailed the city, and could say it in a clear and focused way that caught fire. And this was the contest, and he knocked him off.
Prabal?
They've said it. I'm just here being a spectator between those two. So, like all of us.
But you saw it go down.
Yeah. To me, Zoran's win, or not before even the win, the fact that he was, possible candidate, was in itself in so many ways, why I went to America. It was a promise of someone who didn't fit in the majority, but someone with ambition, desire to make a change, could find a footing. I don't want to keep on romanticizing this idea of New York, so I don't want people to think that, oh, he's a fashion designer. It's just being like, it's not. I'm fully aware of what's happening, but at the same time, I have to, as a creative person, I have to keep on looking at what is a possibility. As an immigrant, we are constantly taught to kind of either fit in or you don't belong, all that stuff. But I always feel like, and as a minority, as a marginalized person, what we do is we can absorb and observe what's happening and imagine a better future. And that's what he did. That's what he did. He looked at it. So when he came on board, and it was, I honestly, you can speak to him, hopefully one day he will tell you, I'm not 100% sure, even if he knew he was going to win. Nobody thought, because it was not a possibility. Nobody believed it, but somehow it resonated. It was simply because the whole campaign was run on truth, being authentic. And so it's exciting.
In some
honestly,
sense,
it's
it's
exciting.
the audacity of hope.
Yeah, it is.
Borrow from Obama.
It is, and that's what, and I keep on giving to the majority. The people in power wants us to be cynical and give up. I refuse.
So do you think the one thing that New York is sort of exporting to the world right now is hope?
I'd like to believe that. I don't think none of us here, because the very fact that everyone is here, they're readers, thinkers, and all of that stuff, I don't think anyone's a Pollyanna thinking like, like it's all going to be hopeful. It's not. But the challenges, that's just life. What New York is offering is life. It's challenges constantly. But what I love about is, till now, is what I really like about America, for a sort of long time, is the ability to question the authority. I know it's in shaky grounds right now, but the freedom of speech is what I went there for. As a queer man, living in this part of the world at that time was impossible, But in America, in New York, it promised a freedom for me to be myself, to question it, and so I still have to hold on to it.
Prabal, I have to ask, you do talk about New York allowing you your identity in
Yes,
that
yeah.
sense, but race did come up as a recurring problem
Of course,
for you.
it does. It does. It's inevitable. When I was in India, I look like a lot of Northeasterns. The plight of the Northeasterns in India is a different story, a story we can go on talking about it, right? When you don't fit into majority, whether it's by the size of your shade of your color, the size, whatever the race is, you're constantly being, questioned when you don't belong to the majority. But I look at it, and yeah, I was questioned. I was questioned about my Americana, in spite of being a citizen, all of that stuff. But but I'm the kind of person who I always like, bring it on. Bring it on, because I'm not going to react in the way you want me to react. I'll react to you through my artistry and creativity on a runway show. I will bring in people who you may not have ever considered beautiful or befitting of that place. I will do that, and that's what all I can do. I'm a creative person. I'm a storyteller, and storytellers are healers. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great moment to open this up to the audience. If we can just get a couple of questions. Yes, the gentleman at the back there in blue.
Of course, I have to go back to Zohran Mamdani again. Very few people in the world knew about Bill Blasio or Eric Adams, but pretty much everyone in the world knows about Zohran Mamdani. So the emergence and the rise of Mamdani has given a lot of hope, not only in New York, but across the world for people on the left of the spectrum. So the question is, isn't this a huge burden on Mamdani? Because he's starting with a huge burden of expectations.
Who would like to?
He created the expectations, right? So he made big, bold, clear, easy to understand promises, and now now he has to deliver, and that puts a lot of pressure on him, and it puts a lot of pressure on the progressive movement. There's a lot riding on him and his success. For me, as a New Yorker, there's a lot riding on his success because I want a more livable, affordable city where where my kids will be able to afford to live one day, right? On their own. A lot of the Democratic Party is afraid of him, right? He's going to be the poster boy. Even before he was elected, he became the poster boy for the Republicans, as if he had caused this massive government shutdown. As a state lawmaker and as a backbencher in the New York State Assembly, suddenly they were blaming the federal government shutdown on him. So yeah, there's a lot riding on it, and it'll be really interesting to see how he and his administration can perform under real fire.
Deborah?
And I'd like to say that, we're, 3.5 weeks into his administration, and he's accomplished a lot. He, right out the gate, little things and really some big things, like, he's getting free child care beginning at age 3 to 4. So
And let's not forget, it's been 26 days.
yeah, 26 days, and he fixed a notorious, hump in the middle of a bike path, that everyone coming off the Queensboro Bridge.
We
knew
laugh,
very
but at the
well.
end of the day, he is New York
Yeah.
mayor. Those are his jobs. He may have just
and
set
he's-
himself up.
Right, and he's talking to people still. He's still putting out his videos. He's still listening to people. So, I'm really heartened. I think he has got off to a good start. I don't know, that's my 2 cents, but I'm his
I
auntie.
think we have time for one more question. Yes, the lady in the second row.
Namaste. This question is for Prabal. A lot what you said, I felt that it was through your personal experience, like looking both at the dark and the light side of things. So just your little more, how can we do it, like on the ground, when, because we are attuned to see the dark side, oh yeah, it's pricey, New York is this and this, or I don't have this, and how do you, in your personal experience, actually prepped yourself up to actually look at the lighter side of?
Oh boy. There are a few things that I do personally that works for me. There's a, as cliched as it sounds, there's a gratitude journal that I do. I write simple things, 5 to 10 things almost every day that I'm grateful for. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. It can be the hot steaming momos that I had, you know, like, or like, you know, something. It's very simple. It starts like that. And but my biggest strength of hope comes from my siblings and my mother. My mother is a North Star. If you read the book, you know, you'll know I'm a mama's boy. My mother lives in Kathmandu. I live in New York. And every morning on my way to work, I call her and I said, Mom, Mommy, how are you? And we talk about life, politics. We talk about food. These are little things, you know, that is important. And I don't have a recipe for how to be a positive person, how to look at it. I think I lead and I live my life with utmost gratitude. I'm a kid, a queer kid from Nepal, Kathmandu, a small country sandwiched between two giants. The possibility of me becoming a designer, dressing Michelle Obama, going to the Met Gala, and sitting here having a conversation with these two and her, like in front of it is. I didn't even, you know, I couldn't even imagine it. Do you know what I mean? So how can I not be grateful? So, and that city, that country gave me the identity. I had the courage and the audacity to dream. I had an incredible siblings who supported me, and a mother who believed in me. You know, and I always say, the fact that we come from this part of the world, the reverence, our roots, our heritage, it is the biggest strength that we have, you know, and that is what is going to literally give you the light that you're seeking. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Right, I think that's about all we have time for, but thank you, all of you, for a wonderful session. And, you know, we began by saying that we saw some distinct similarities between New York and Kolkata. We'll leave it up to the audience to decide whether they are indeed that or not. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you.